All right, let's talk about Arya II. Um, Arya II is a rather short chapter, but quite a lot happens in it, really, when you consider it. In a sense that Arya is allowed to train and with Syrio in this chapter. So far, the past few chapters have been largely introduction of character chapters, a whole bunch of them in a row. And this is, for the most part, that still, but at least we're only getting one more character. You know, before we had a Catelyn chapter introducing Littlefinger and and Varys, and then a small council chapter where we're introduced again to Renly and Pycelle and Littlefinger again and Varys again, and then Jon at the wall, and we get the all the characters that he trains with, and then all the High Lords with the Tyrion chapter. We've been kind of getting this onslaught of new characters, and in this chapter, at least it scales it back to essentially one new character, but it's only the second Arya chapter, which if you think the last one was her getting her sword, and granted she was part of the story with regards to the Sansa incident with Lady and Joffrey and Micah, but you know it feels nice to be back with Arya. She seems like her story is going very fast compared to, say, a Clash of Kings or a Storm of Swords, where you have so many Arya chapters and it goes much slower. But anyway, let's get into it. Arya. Her father had been fighting with the council again. Arya could see it on his face when he came to the table late again, as he had been so often. I think one thing to remember here is some people read this and they kind of assume that Ned doesn't really understand his power as hand. He shouldn't really be arguing. It's either the king ordered something and they need to do it, and so there's no argument to it, or he's the hand and everybody does what he says. You know, there's a clear chain of command, so it's odd that there's a lot of arguing. And this doesn't really make very much sense. It may be that George hadn't decided how much power the hand had yet. But, again, the last Eddard chapter, he doesn't want to offend them, and he describes himself as a first among equals, and that's certainly not the case later on. The hand has all of the power, with the exception of Kevin at the end, but that's a very different situation because he's balancing power at the Tyrells. And he's regent anyway, so he's regent and Mace's hand. So that's different. But I think people, when they think about Ned being angry and fighting here, that they're forgetting that, like, Ned's last chapter, he was with Catelyn and discovered the dagger and is angry and preoccupied with that. So I think he may be more preoccupied with the dagger and maybe, trying to hide the fact that he's preoccupied with the dagger and the Catelyn plot, and pretending to fight with the small council. I think Ned is more savvy than people kind of let on. He's more scheming than people kind of think, and it's how the Game of Thrones show portrayed him affects people's opinions on the book. But Ned is a schemer. And here he's probably upset about the dagger, not the hands tourney. The first course, a sweet soup made with pumpkins. American food from the New World, but George puts in New World foods and New World animals. Had already been taken when Ned Stark strode into the small hall. They'd called it that to set it apart from the Great Hall, where the king would feast 1,000. But it was a long room and a high vaulted ceiling and bench space for 200 at its trestle tables. "My lord," George said when father entered. He rose to his feet, and the rest of the guard rose with him. Each man wore a new cloak, heavy gray wool and with a white satin border. A hand of beaten silver clutched the wood folds of each cloak and marked their wares as men of the hand's household guard. There were 50 of them, so most of the benches were empty. I don't know if we ever hear about hand's household guard anymore. I mean, Tyrion has the hill clans from the Vale, the mountain clans from the Vale, but does that ever come up again? The Hand's household guard. Be seated, Eddard Stark said. I see you have started without me. I'm pleased to know that there's still some men of sense in the city. He signaled for the meal to resume. The servants began bringing up platters of ribs roasted in a crust of garlic and herbs. The talk in the yard is we shall have a tourney, my lord, Jory said as he resumed his seat. They say that knights will come from all over the realm to joust and feast in honor of your appointment as Hand of the King. Arya could see that her father was not very happy about that. Do they also say this is the last thing in the world I would have wished? Sansa's eyes had grown wide as the plates. A tourney, she breathed. She was seated between Septim Ordain and Jane Poole, as far from Arya as she could get without drawing a reproach from father. Will we be permitted to go, father? You know my feelings, Sansa. It seems I must arrange Robert's games and pretend to be honored for his sake. That does not mean I must subject my daughters to this folly. Interesting the lack of respect for the king here. He just says Robert's games. Oh, please, Sansa said. I want to see. Septim Ordain spoke up. Princess Myrcella will be there, my lord, and her younger than Lady Sansa. All the ladies of the court will be expected at a grand event like this. And as the tourney is in your honor, it would look queer if your family did not attend. I think Ned might be wondering about the violence and whether he's going to subject his daughters to violence. Sending his sons to an execution is one thing. Sending his daughters to a to a jousting, that's something else. Father looked pained. I suppose so. Very well. I shall arrange you a place, Sansa. He saw Arya. For both of you. I don't care about their stupid tourney, Arya said. She knew Prince Joffrey would be there, and she hated Prince Joffrey. Sansa lifted her head. It'll be a splendid event. You shan't be wanted. Anger flashed across Father's face. Enough, Sansa. More of that, and you will change my mind. I'm weary unto death of this endless war you two are fighting. You are sisters. I expect you to behave like sisters. Is that understood? It's now been a good 3 weeks since the incident. Sansa bit her lip and nodded. Arya lowered her face and stared sullenly at her plate. It's interesting. Later, Arya is the one that chews her lips, but it's interesting that Sansa chews her lips here. She could feel tears stinging in her eyes. She rubbed them away angrily, determined not to cry. The only sound was the clatter of knives and forks. Pray excuse me, her father announced to the table. I find I have small appetite tonight. He walked from the hall. And this is just reminding them about the family. The family troubles are really the Lannister troubles, right? And Ned at this point thinks the Lannisters probably killed Jon Arryn, and are responsible for Lady and sent an assassin to kill Bran. So he's obviously like very upset about that, and Sansa being into this tourney and everything, and him needing to play this role, of course, makes him angry. After he was gone, Sansa exchanged excited whispers with Jane Poole. Down the table, Jory laughed at a joke, and Hullen started in about horseflesh. Hullen, of course, we know that is the master of horse. He's the father of Harwin, who later joins the Brotherhood Without Banners. Jory, of course, gets killed outside the brothel by Jaime Lannister. And when they talk about horseflesh, they're usually talking about jousting. Horseflesh usually means jousting and ice and fire talk. Your warhorse now, he may not be the best one for the joust. Not the same thing. Oh no, not the same at all. The men had heard it all before. Yeah, this is the because Jory does participate in the joust, but it's strange because if he has a war horse and he's not good at jousting, like how well can Jory really joust? He should do quite poorly if this is like his first time jousting. We'll get back to Jory, but it's strange that yes, he has a war horse, and um, if he is talking, if he's talking to Jory, probably. Um, the men had heard it all before. Desmond, Jax, and Hohen's son Harwin shouted at him down together, and Porther called for more wine. Uh, it's a fun little game figuring out where all of um, Ned's guards and servants like end up. I think Desmond dies during the coup. Jax Hullen dies. So does Porther, but Jax is interesting because Jax all of a sudden appears in the appendices under the command of Hallis Mullen. So at some point, Jax survives the coup and is brought to Catelyn, and then put under the command of Hallis Mullen and escorting Ned's bones. And the only way that could have happened is if he helped escort Cleo's Frey back. None of this is on page at all, but just the fact that like Jax disappears from one location and then reappears in another location in the appendices is the only explanation for it. So Jax ends up surviving and is still missing, with Hallis Mullen. No one talked to Arya. She didn't care. She liked it that way. She would have eaten her meals alone in her bedchamber if they let her. Sometimes they did, when father had to dine with the king or some lord, or the envoys from this place or that place. The rest of the time they ate in the solar, just him and her and Sansa. That was when Arya missed her brothers most. She wanted to tease Bran and play with baby Rickon and have Robb smile at her. She wanted Jon to muss her hair and call her little sister and finish her sentences with her. But all of them were gone. She had no one left but Sansa, and Sansa wouldn't even talk to her unless father made her. Oh, the romance between Jon and Arya. Back at Winterfell, they had eaten in the Great Hall almost half the time. Her father used to say that a lord need to eat with his men if he hoped to keep them. Know the men who follow you, she heard him tell Robb once, and let them know you. Don't ask your men to die for a stranger. This is very interesting because this line is, people think of this a lot when they think of Jon's mistakes at the Wall, that when Jon becomes Lord Commander, he purposely stops eating with his friends, while Ned feels it's very important to eat with his friends. At Winterfell, he always had an extra seat at his own table, and every day a different man would be asked to join him. One night it would be Van Poole, and the talk would be of coppers and bread stores and servants. The next time it would be Micken, and her father would listen to him go on about armor and swords and how a hot forge should be and the best way to temper steel. Another day would be Hullen and his endless horse talk, or Septon Shale from the library, or Jory, or Sir Roderick, or even old Nan with her stories. I don't think George can really decide on coppers as a term for accounting books. Later, he says he uses the term counting coppers as like this one phrase that Robert uses that Littlefinger picks up, that, but it seems that Arya also calls it coppers, and like calling it counting coppers is not that different. So and then later on, I think counting coppers does appear in somebody else's vernacular, randomly. So it becomes one of these things where, let's see, laws are tedious business, and counting coppers is first said by Robert. Then they kind of, Renly starts saying, oh, other people say it. But then Lord Randall Tarley uses counting coppers. But here, like, Arya was already counting coppers. So, anyway, Septon Shale, who later we know is thrown down a well. And Sir Roderick, who's later, he's actually secretly in town or leaving town. He ends up, getting killed at Winterfell, and then by Ramsay, and then Old Nan is currently imprisoned at the Dreadfort. Anyway, Arya had loved nothing better than to sit at her father's table and listen to them talk. She had loved listening to the men on the benches too, to free riders, tough as leathers, courtly knights, and bold young squires, grizzled old men-at-arms. She used to throw snowballs at them and help them steal pies from the kitchen. Their wives gave her scones, and she invented names for their babies and played monsters and maidens and hide the treasure and come into my castle with their children. Fat Tom used to call her Arya Underfoot because he said that's where she always was. She liked that a lot better than Arya Horseface. Fat Tom is also killed during the coup. We don't know about what these games are, Monsters and Maidens and Hide the Treasure and Come into My Castle. But the general joke is that they all sound like euphemisms for sex. And yet later they're kind of used as euphemisms for sex. Come into my castle, enter by my vagina, hide the treasure, hide the salami, monsters and maidens, man and a woman. It's George humor. So Arya Horseface, the Starks all have horse faces. So only that was Winterfell, a world away, and everything was changed. This was the first time they had supped with the men since arriving in King's Landing. Arya hated it. She hated the sound of their voices now, the way they laughed, the stories they told. They'd been her friends. She'd felt safe around them. But now she knew that was a lie. They'd let the queen kill Lady. That was horrible enough. And then the hound found Micah. Jane Poole had told Arya that he'd cut him up in so many pieces that they'd given him back to the butcher in a bag. And at first, the poor men had thought it was a pig they'd slaughtered. And no one had raised a voice or drawn a blade or anything. Not Harwin, who had always talked so bold, or Alan, who was going to be a knight, or Jory, who was captain of the guard. Alan, I think Alan. Oh, Alan goes with Harwin and is killed. Yes, I think Alan is kind of in the pre-Brotherhood Without Banners. Yeah. But nonetheless, yeah, Alan goes off with Harwin and eventually dies. But what's interesting is a lot of this hatred that she has is secretly Ned's hatred, that she doesn't know that her father is feeling at the same time. Of course, this is written in a very angry child way, very different writing style than, say, strikingly different than, say, the Tyrion chapter, which came right before this. He was my friend, Arya whispered into her plate, so low that no one could hear. Her ribs sat there untouched, grown cold now, a thin film of grease congealing beneath them on the plate. Arya looked at them and felt ill. She pushed away from the table. Pray, where do you think you're going, young lady? Septon Mordain asked. I'm not hungry. Arya found it an effort to remember her courtesies. May I be excused, please? She recited stiffly. You may not, the Septa said. You have scarcely touched your food. You will sit down and clean your plate. You clean it! Before anyone could stop her, Arya bolted for the door as the men laughed, and Septim Dane called out loudly after her, her voice rising higher and higher. Now remember, like, Ned feels the exact same way, so he's not really going to be too angry at Arya. He understands what she's feeling completely. Fat Tom was at his post, guarding the door to the Tower of the Hand. He blinked when he saw Arya rushing towards him and heard the Septus shouts, "Here now, little one, hold on," he started to say, reaching. But Arya slid between his legs, and then she was running up the winding tower steps, her feet hammering on the stone while Fat Tom huffed and puffed behind her. Her bedchamber was the only place that Arya liked in all King's Landing, and the thing she liked best about it was the door, a massive slab of dark oak with black iron bands. When she slammed that door and dropped the heavy crossbar, no one could get into her room, not Septim or Dane or Fat Tom or Sansa or Jory or the Hound. Nobody. She slammed it now. What she doesn't know is actually Varys can get in there. There's secret passages everywhere in the Tower of the Hand, so she thinks it's this private place, and it's not. When the bar was down, Arya finally felt safe enough to cry. She went to the window. It's an interesting and yet irrelevant kind of idea that Varys would know that Arya's crying here, but whatever the case. She went to the window seat and sat there, sniffling, hating them all and herself most of all. It was her fault, everything bad that had happened. Sansa said so, and Jane too. Fat Tom was knocking at her door. "Arya, girl, what's wrong?" he called out. "You in there?" "No," she shouted. The knocking stopped. A moment later, she heard him go away. Fat Tom was always easy to fool. Like, obviously, Fat Tom is not fooled here, but it's like... but this is a pretty funny, this is a very funny line. Fat Tom was easy to fool. She did, like, obviously he wasn't fooled by that. Arya went to the chest at the foot of her bed. She knelt, opened the lid, and began pulling her clothes out with both hands, grabbing a handful of silk and satin and velvet and wool and tossing them on the floor. It was there at the bottom of the chest where she had hidden it. Arya lifted it out almost tenderly and drew the slender blade from its sheath. Needle. She thought of Micah again, and her eyes filled with tears. Her fault. If she had never asked him to play at swords with her, there was a pounding at the door louder than before. "Arya Stark, you open this door at once. Do you hear me?" Arya spun around with needle in her hand. "You better not come in here," she warned. She slashed at the air savagely. "The Hand will hear of this," Septim Dane raged. "I don't care," Arya screamed. "Go away. You'll rue this insolent behavior, young lady. I promise you that." Arya listened to the door until she heard the sound of the Septim's receding footsteps. Now, Arya does eventually, she describes this harsh relationship with Sansa and Septim Dane, but she later does miss the characters. And in the Mercy chapter, there's a character that she kind of latches on to, who is a Septim Dane character and things like that. She went back to the window, needle in hand, and looked down in the courtyard below. If only she could climb like Bran, she thought. She would go out the window and down the tower, run away from this horrible place, away from Sansa and Septim Dane and Princess Joffrey, from it all. Man, this is the first time I'm thinking about this one. This is the first the Princess in the Tower metaphor that is commonly used in Ice and Fire later on, where Val is in her tower and there's discussions of whether Mance can climb up, and Bran falling from his tower, and Ariana in her tower, and Ashara Dane leaping from the tower, all these sorts of things. The Princess in the Tower, and here she is in the same situation. Lyanna in her tower, right? And here's Arya in her tower. She would go out the window and down the tower, run away from this horrible place, away from Sansa and Septim Dane and Prince Joffrey, from all of them. Steal some food from the kitchens, take Needle and her good boots and warm cloak. She could find Nymeria in the wild woods below the Trident and together they would return to Winterfell, or run to Jon on the wall. She found herself wishing that Jon was here with her now. Then maybe she wouldn't feel so alone. A soft knock at the door behind her turned Arya away from the window and her dreams of escape. "Arya," her father called out. "Open the door. We need to talk." Arya crossed the room and lifted the crossbar. Father was alone. He seemed more sad than angry. That made Arya feel even worse. "May I come in?" Arya nodded, then dropped her eyes, ashamed. Father closed the door. "Whose sword is that?" "Mine." Arya had almost forgotten the needle in her hand. "Give it to me." Reluctantly, Arya surrendered her sword, wondering if she would ever hold it again. Her father turned it into the light, examining both sides of the blade. He tested the point with his thumb. "A bravo's blade," he said. "Yet it seems to me that I know the maker's mark. This is Micken's work." Arya could not lie to him. She lowered her eyes. Lord Eddard sighed. My 9-year-old daughter is being armed from my own forge, and I know nothing of it. The hand of the king is expected to rule the 7 kingdoms, yet it seems I cannot even rule my own household. How is it that you come to own a sword, Arya? Where did you get this?" Arya chewed her lip and said nothing. There's her chewing lip. She would not. Is this the first? I have to check on one. Is this the first time that she's chewed her lip? This is the first time that she chews her lip. This, of course, becomes her thing. Like Jon flexing his fingers and such. She would not betray Jon, not even to their father. After a while, Father said, "I don't suppose it matters truly." He looked down gravely at the sword in his hand. "This is no toy for children, least of all for a girl. What would Septim Ordain say if she knew you were playing with swords?" "I wasn't playing," Arya insisted. I hate Septim Ordain." "That's enough," her father's voice was curt and hard. "The Sept is doing no more than is her duty, though gods know you have made it a struggle for the poor woman. Your mother and I have charged her with an impossible task of making you a lady." "I don't want to be a lady," Arya flared. "I ought to snap this toy across my knee here and now and put an end to this nonsense." "Needle wouldn't break," she said defiantly, but her voice betrayed her words. "It has a name, does it?" Her father sighed. "Ah, Arya, you have a wildness in you, child. The wolf's blood, my father used to call it. Lyanna had a touch of it, and my brother Brandon more than a touch. It brought them both to an early grave." This is always this thing, is people are always talking, and this comes later too, where the conversation flows, but people always compare Arya to Lyanna, but they kind of forget that they always forget about Brandon. You know, why does Brandon have a statue? You know, like, oh, Lyanna has a statue, it must mean this and this. Why does Brandon have a statue? What the Brandon story, we only finally start getting into some of it with Lady Dustin, but I always felt that there's more to the Brandon story. That just fans don't even think about it because they're so hung up on Lyanna. But here, Brandon has the wolf's blood like Arya. Arya is being compared to Brandon. Lyanna has a touch of it. But again, we have to think about Arya. You know, Lyanna's in her tower. Arya's in her tower here. You know, Lyanna liked to play with swords, wooden swords at least. Arya heard sadness in his voice. He did not often speak of his father or his brother and sister who had died before she was born. "Lyanna might have carried a sword if my father had allowed it. You remind me of her sometimes. You even look like her." Again, like in real history, many ladies were trained to fight. In Ice and Fire, it seems like there's plenty of ladies being trained to fight. I mean, the Mormonts, the Dornish, the Brienne, it's all over the place. So it is a little odd that there's like resistance to it. It should be considered a fairly normal thing, but you know, and granted, you know, that doesn't take much convincing, but it's odd that like there's such a belief that this is a big problem, and Arya is called boy over and over and over and over and again in the story, and she has to gender bend when, you know, it wasn't really that big. Maybe with common women you didn't do it, but highborn people, They were trained. They were often trained in fighting. Lyanna was beautiful, Arya said, startled. Everybody said so. It was not a thing that was ever said of Arya. Arya is later called beautiful when she makes it to Braavos. She was, Eddard Stark agreed, beautiful and willful and dead before her time. He lifted the sword, held it out between them. Arya, what did you think to do with this needle? Who do you hope to skewer? Your sister, Septim or Dane? Do you know the first thing about sword fighting? And in the end, she ends up skewering some poor boy. So she does skewer some people. All she could think of was a lesson Jon gave her. Stick them with the pointy end, she blurted out. Her father snorted back laughter. That is the essence of it, I suppose. Arya desperately wanted to explain, to make him see. I was trying to learn, but her eyes filled with tears. I asked Micah to practice with me. The grief came on her all at once. She turned away, shaking. I asked him. It was my fault. It was me. It was Jon's fault. Jon shouldn't have given you the sword. Jon is the one that killed. Jon's responsible for Micah's death. Just kidding. I mean, obviously Joffrey is, but it's Suddenly her father's arms were around her. He held her gently as she turned him and sobbed against his chest. No, sweet one. Grieve for your friend, but never blame yourself. You did not kill the butcher's boy. The murder lies at the hound's door. Oh, I suppose, yeah, the hound killed him. You're right. Him and the cruel woman he serves. I hate them, Arya confided, red-faced sniffling. The hound and the queen and the king and Prince Joffrey. I hate them all. Joffrey lied. It wasn't the way he said it. Oh, Joffrey lied. It wasn't the way he said it. I hate Sansa too. She did remember. She just lied so Joffrey would like her. We all lie, her father said. Or did you truly think I'd believed that Nymeria ran off? Arya blushed guiltily. Jory promised not to tell. Jory kept his word, her father said with a smile. There are some things I do not need to be told. Even a blind man could see that the wolf would never have left you willingly. We had to throw rocks, she said miserably. I told her to run, to go free, that I didn't want her anymore. There were other wolves for her to play with. She heard them howling, and Jory said the woods were full of game, so she'd have a deer to hunt. Only she kept following, and finally we had to throw rocks. I hit her twice. She whined and looked at me, and I felt so ashamed. So shamed. But it was right, wasn't it? The queen would have killed her. It was right, her father said. And even the lie was not without honor. He'd put Needle aside when he went to Arya to embrace her. Now he took the blade up again and walked to the window where he stood for a moment, looking out across the courtyard. When he turned back, his eyes were thoughtful. He seated himself on the window seat, Needle across his lap. Arya, sit down. I need to try to explain something to you. She perched anxiously on the edge of the bed. You are too young to be burdened with all of my cares, he told her. But you are also a Stark of Winterfell. You know our words. Winter is coming, Arya whispered. The hard, cruel times, her father said. We've tasted them on the Trident, child, and when Bran fell. You were born in the long summer, sweet one. You've never known anything else. But now winter is truly coming. Remember the sigil of our house, Arya. The direwolf, she said. Thinking of Nymeria. She hugged her knees against her chest suddenly. Let me tell you something about wolves, child. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. These kind of ideas come from Rudyard Kipling's poetry, and a lot of these things were brought up in George R.R. Martin's story called "And Seven Times Never Kill Man." That's where "Winter is Coming" comes from. Where the bunch of zealots are told winter is coming, meaning start farming, prepare. Instead, they go to war and don't save anything, and it's a tough time for them. Summer is time for squabbles. In winter, we must protect one another, keep each other warm, share our strength. So if you must hate, Arya, hate those who would truly do us harm. Septa Mordane is a good woman, and Sansa is your sister. You may be as different as the sun and the moon, but the same blood flows through both your hearts. You need her as she needs you, and I need both of you. Gods help me. He sounded so tired that it made Arya sad. I don't hate Sansa, she told him. Not truly. It was only half a lie. I do not mean to frighten you, but neither will I lie to you. We have come into a dark, dangerous place, child. This is not Winterfell. We have enemies who mean us ill. This is, what's on Ned's mind, obviously, the dagger and the assassin and Jon Arryn's murder. We cannot fight this war among ourselves. This willfulness of yours, the running off, the angry words, the disobedience at home, these were only the summer games of a child. Here and now, with winter soon upon us, that is a different matter. It is time to begin growing up. I will, Arya vowed. She had never loved him so much as she did in that instant. I can be strong too. I can be as strong as Robb. He held Needle out to her, hilt first. Here. She looked at the sword with wonder in her eyes. For a moment she was afraid to touch it, afraid that if she reached for it, it would be snatched away again. But then her father said, "Go on, it's yours." And she took it in her hand. I can keep it for true, he smiled. If I took it away, no doubt you'd find a morning star hidden under your pillow within the fortnight. Try not to stab your sister, whatever the provocation. Of course, George, not that you can tell in this context, but George uses morning star incorrectly in Ice and Fire. He thinks it's a flail, and rather than being a spiked mace. The next morning, they broke their fast. She apologized to Septa Mordane and asked for her pardon. The Septa peered at her suspiciously, but father nodded. 3 days later, at midday, her father's steward Van Poole sent Arya to the small hall. The trestle tables had been dismantled and the benches shoved against the wall. The hall seemed empty until an unfamiliar voice said, "You are late, boy." A slight man with a bald head and a great beak of a nose stepped out of the shadows, holding a pair of slender wooden swords. "Tomorrow you'll be here at midday." He had an accent, the lilt of the free cities, Bravos perhaps, or Mere. "Who are you?" Arya asked. "I'm your dancing master." He tossed her one of the wooden blades. She grabbed for it, missed, and heard the clatter on the floor. "Tomorrow you will catch it. Now pick it up." Now, a lot of fans do make a big deal of the fact that the faceless men are from Bravos, and so is her instructor. I can't believe my brain is blanking. I guess it's because it's Syrio Farrell, of course. I don't know why my brain is blanking here. But a lot of people make a big deal out of the fact that both Syrio is from Bravos and the Faceless Men are from Bravos, and her story makes it to Bravos. And so there's a lot of wondering. People wonder, like, is there a connection? Is there a connection between Syrio Farrell and the Faceless Men? And I don't necessarily think there is. I think that probably what happened is that George had an idea in his mind that Arya eventually needs to go to Bravos. And so he creates different possibilities for her to get there without fully knowing how he's going to get there. So he's making her first instructor Bravosi, which might later on like pull her in. It turns out it doesn't. It turns out like it has nothing to do with it, right? But it's here just for the sake of it. And in fact, later she looks for ships, and there's some ships, one of them being from Bravos. There's confusion on where the ship is from, but there's constantly these opportunities for the Arya story to go to Bravos that George like seeds, but he doesn't necessarily execute. So I think Syrio Farrell being from Bravos is that George didn't know at this point how he was going to get Arya to Bravos, but he knew he wanted to get her there. Syrio is a possibility, that it was a path not taken. I'm your dancing master, Tamari catch it. It was not a stick, it was a true wooden sword, complete with a grip and guard and pommel. Arya picked it up and clutched it nervously with both hands, holding it out in front of her. It was heavier than it looked, much heavier than needle. The bald man clicked his teeth together. That is not the way, boy. That is not a great sword. That is not a great sword that is needing two hands to swing it. You will take the blade in one hand. It's too heavy, Arya said. It is heavy. It is as heavy as it needs to be to make you strong and for the balancing. A hollow inside is filled with lead, just so. One hand now is all that is needing. Just so becomes this like somewhat foreigner phrase that's used all the time. Arya took her right hand off the grip and wiped her sweaty palm on her pants. She held the sword in her left hand. He seemed to approve. The left is good. All is reversed. It'll make your enemies more awkward. In truth, like, and we write about this in the fanfic, but in truth, like, yes, for beginners, it would make people awkward. But eventually, you're going to fight enough people that you're going to come across enough left-handers that one can fight them well enough. But if she's fighting somebody that doesn't have that much fighting experience, then maybe. Now you are standing wrong. Turn your body side face. Yes. So you are skinny as a shaft of a spear. Do you know? That is good too. The target is smaller. Now the grip. Let me see. He moved close and peered at her hand, prying her fingers apart, rearranging them. Just so. Yes. Do not squeeze it so tight. No, the grip must be deft, delicate. What if I drop it? Arya said. The steel must be part of your arm, the bald man told her. Can you drop part of your arm? No. 9 years Syrio Forel was the first sword to the Sea Lord of Braavos. He knows these things. Listen to him, boy. It was the third time he had called her boy. I'm a girl, Arya objected. Boy, girl, you are a sword, that is all. Of course, this boy aspect comes in later with Yoren calling her boy as well, and her hiding as a boy. But this is an important symbolic, gender bending aspect to the story. It happens with Dany. It later happens with Cersei. Just so you're not holding a battle axe. You're holding a needle. Arya finished him fiercely. Just so. Now we'll begin to dance. Remember, child, this is not the iron dance of Westeros we are learning. The knight's dance, hacking and hammering. No. This is the Braavos dance, the water dance, swift and sudden. All men are made of water. Do you know this? When you pierce them, the water leaks out and they die. He took a step backward, raised his own wooden blade. Now you will try to strike me. The difference here has to do with the evolution of swords and armor throughout time. So originally, swords were a bit more dull, and so people would wear armor so that you couldn't get cut. Though eventually they got to that swords could be very sharp and you could pierce through armor quite easily, and so armor kind of disappeared as the swords became thinner and sharper, and so then swordplay becomes this very different art form where you're not doing a slash, you're doing a wrist flick, and you can stab and kill somebody pretty quick. And so this is the idea is that Braavos is ahead of the curve compared to Westeros here. And it's having a renaissance while Westeros is still in the Middle Ages. Now try to strike me. Arya tried to strike him. She tried for 4 hours until every muscle in her body was sore and aching, while Syrio Forel clicked his teeth together and told her what to do. The next day, their real work began. Yeah, and so a pretty exciting end to things. I would say that the conversation with Syrio at the end, I think people really latch onto as the best part of this chapter. It's very interesting. Meeting this colorful foreign character who speaks very differently. And, the Ned stuff is very sentimental in the middle. But I think people were like, when people think about why they like this chapter, they like the sort of end to it. Anyway, that's that. Again, a chapter to introduce Ned, introduce Syrio, and all of these introduction chapters. So we'll see what's the next one here for. The next one is it another introduction chapter? Are we ever going to get some action here? Oh, we go to Daenerys. So yeah, so that's next. Okay. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.